Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Search, and I am with the Area Agency on Aging with Land of Sky, and I am a regional long term care ombudsman. And today I am so excited to interview one of my wonderful friends, Dr. Jay Worthington, who is the co founder of Appalachian Specialty Pharmacy here in Asheville. And he's going to tell us all about growing up in a very small town in Georgia and his life up until now. And it's very interesting. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Corey, how are you?
I'm good. Now, Jay, I have been through the town that you grew up in, um, and it is a blip on the map.
Don't blink.
So, will you tell us a little bit about Fitzgerald, Georgia?
All right. Fitzgerald, Georgia is about 200 miles south of Atlanta. Whereas a lot of people say, oh, you mean down by the airport? And I says, big. So keep going, and keep going. Right in the heart of South Georgia, where it's hot and sticky most of the time. I'm actually from the same place where one of Corey's dogs came from, on hard on the Okmulgee River, which is actually where National Geographic has determined the first Christian baptism in North America occurred in 1516. I'm not making this up. By some of DeSoto's forces when they encountered the Creek Indians. So all these other places can claim to be the buckle of the Bible Belt, but we were first. So that is kind of, in all seriousness, that tells you a little bit about the culture of South Florida.
Yes.
That it's a fairly conservative place. It's extremely rural. Um, but to balance out the site of DeSoto's excursions, my dad's house is 8 miles from the spot where Jefferson Davis was captured, fleeing, trying to flee to South America. So it gives you another constellation in the description of where I'm from.
Now, Jay, when you and I were talking the other day, um, you mentioned that the thought of being gay at when you were younger wasn't really discussed and never
Wasn't
really
Yeah,
dawned
that
on you.
yeah. I mean it um, wasn't really a thing, you know, and um, anything gay would have been what we saw on the news, which at that point, I'll be 55 this October. So that means in 1981, I was about to start high school. So the only thing gay we ever saw would have been the most outrageous examples that could be filmed of the nascent gay pride parades in the far off big cities. So the most extreme examples of something or whatever bullshit Jerry Falwell could pipe into the mainstream media. Can I say that?
You already did.
Okay, good. That was for you, Corey.
Thank you. So, growing up where it wasn't really discussed or anything like that,
Yeah,
when those visions, when those things were on the TV, was anything ever said
no,
about
it
that
was
here?
not that it was a negative thing. It just wasn't a thing. South Georgia, like a lot of the South, is really good at pretending everything's okay. You know that would be the mantra in my hometown, and especially in my good Southern family. How is everybody? Everybody's fine. Everything's fine. Everything's always fine. Um, and every family has one of us in them, or something like us, or some. Every family has one. Fill in the blank. But in the South, we're really good at knowing what we want to know. But it wasn't that it was actively disparaged. It just wasn't on the radar. So it wasn't on my radar. It didn't occur to me that I might be gay. It should have. Um, it definitely should have about the time I was 15 and, doing some things that that would qualify me for the club. But I was
Now,
also pursuing what I thought a good boy did. You know, I was dating girls as well, and figured my life would take that ordinary course of events.
And then you went to school, you
Yep.
left Fitzgerald,
Yep.
and you went to two of the biggest areas
Oh,
that
yeah. I lived in Atlanta. Well, I spent most of my college career at the University of Georgia, um, which would certainly be a nice place to have come out. And um, chase boys all around Athens would have probably been a lot of fun, but I didn't. And then I lived in Atlanta and professionally worked in Atlanta, and then I lived in Washington, D.C., two great cities for the gay community. Great neighborhoods, great presence of gay folks having great lives, but didn't come out then. I managed to move back to Fitzgerald to come out. So I've always done things kind of backwards, and maybe more difficult than they had to be.
Jay, I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned when we talked, you sort of had an escape mechanism, to where you didn't have to think, really anything.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I had several escape hatches that let me avoid coming out for a while. I didn't come out until I was 29. Um, so so I had probably a good decade that I could have made better use of my time instead of hiding or denying or self medicating. And that was what I did in my 20s. I decided I would self medicate with alcohol uh, to avoid something. Wasn't ready to name what the something was. Um, but I also had a family member, my mother, and my mother and father got a divorce in 1985. And then later, my mother came out um, in the 80s before I did. And so I kind of had this idea that I knew somebody was gay in this family. Whew, it's you. So I don't have to worry about it anymore. Um, but that's something we have in common. And her story is equally fascinating, being from the same small town. But that let me hide for a little bit longer. But I really self medicated um, until I couldn't anymore. And I told Corey this story before, that twice in my life, God has spoken to me directly. And anytime somebody tells me that God has spoken to them, I usually back away slowly and try to find the exit. God really did speak to me. So bear with me on this. The first time was when I had a head on collision on Johnson's Ferry Road, just north of Atlanta in 1987. Hit a car head on going about 55 miles an hour. And it was ugly. I didn't have a seatbelt on, and it was a mess. And they thought I'd torn my aorta because the collision with the steering wheel that left the bruise for 6 months. But turns out I didn't. But at the time, I swear I was being embraced by the warmest, most loving presence ever felt. And now, as a medical professional, I can explain it. It was probably my face up against the windshield, and the warmth was blood. But I remember saying, God, I'm not ready to die. And the voice came back and said, well, then you don't have to. And I kind of came back into my body. It was a classic story where you're floating up above and see it and kind of come back. So I thought, okay, well, thank you. Um, Still didn't get the hint. So fast forward 7 years, and I was working for Merrill Lynch in Augusta, Georgia, surrounded by a lot of wonderful people. In another great town, which would have been a good one to come out in, right? A great medical mecca, a lot of gay folks in the town, very southern town, but still an opportunity that I missed. And I was really self medicating with alcohol. really self-medicating with alcohol. Um, but I got lucky and I had a secretary named Sue Heilig, who was an absolute Jedi Knight in recovery circles. And one thing led to another. She had a daughter my age who had similar um, path that I had been on with self medicating. And um, anyway, Sue knew what she had on her hands with me. So to make a long story short, she wound up having a lot to do with me going to my very first 12-step meeting, to an AA meeting. And at the end of that meeting, it's time to circle up and say the serenity prayer. Well, lo and behold, God spoke to me again. And this is what he said at this meeting. He said, "You know, this is not your problem." And I said, "I know, but be quiet. I'm not ready to deal with that one yet." And so that's the last time we actually have spoken. But I knew what it meant. I knew that the underlying thing I was covering up was being gay. And I wasn't quite ready. So I spent 3 solid years immersed in the 12 steps. And that, that's been described as a modern miracle because it allowed me to do the rigorous self examination that got down to the bottom of it, which was really quite simple. You're gay. Um, and I was able to accept that and then actually come out to myself and then to others and kind of get on with life.
And you had mentioned that, your mom was very open and you were
Oh
having
yeah, it
similar
was.
experiences.
Yeah.
How about your dad?
My dad, who turns 86 this April, is great. He still lives in South Georgia. Um, we had a few bumps in the road. Uh, Fitzgerald's a lot like Mayberry, so news travels fast. News travels before it even happens. And he found out I was gay through gossip at a local breakfast joint, which was called Floyd's. Fitzgerald's a breakfast place, not a barber shop. But he found out about it that way, and that's not how I wanted him to find out about it. So we had some difficult moments, um, and we had 6 or 7 years where we were very estranged. And I say that's a lot of how a small town in South Georgia is like. You really worry about what everybody else thinks.
Hmm.
And then it occurs to you maybe what I think is more important than what they think. So we worked through that, um, and now we're great, uh, and I'm very happy about that.
That's
So
excellent.
yeah,
So you you come out back in this small town, and you had described it to me, you had your first relationship
yeah,
with someone who was also newly
yeah,
out. But you had mentioned to me about how you sort of maybe clung to each other.
yeah. We were scared to death, and I think um, I like to read about the history of especially in the 20th century, the history of gay rights movement and the pioneers that came before us um, that made it possible for for us to even be having this conversation. But the changes that have happened really dramatically in the last 40 and 50 years in the area of gay rights um, in this country, um, I think that um, when I was coming of age, fear was still a really big part of wanting, being able to come out. July 4th, 1981 is a very monumental day in the history of the gay experience in America because that's the day the first MMR, the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report, MMWR, that the CDC published that had the first 4 cases of the new disease, which we've come to know now as AIDS. That report came out in the summer of 81, right before a month before I started high school. So here we are about to start high school and about to finally get laid. Um, Not even thinking about by or with who or what, but just know we're finally going to get laid. Um, and then here's this damn new disease that can kill you from having sex. So that was good enough to scare me back into the closet for another decade. And not to make light of it, but it scared the hell out of a lot of people. And we're all old enough to remember what the climate was like around HIV/AIDS and being gay and the effect that had. So anyway, that's kind of a long way around of saying I was still scared to death when I came out in the 90s, because the plague reached its height in 1994, in terms of the devastation, not just in the gay community, but in the entire broader society. Um, and then the advanced antiretrovirals really started to be successful and broadly accepted and put into therapeutic use. So, you know, the history of HIV/AIDS can mark 94 is the worst of it, and everything has been much better since then. But the effects of that were certainly scary. So all of that paints a background of a young man who was scared. So when I finally found somebody else like me, who looked like me, who sounded like me, who was from where I'm from, um, we really clung to each other. Um, we crossed many rivers together and traveled many miles on our growing up together. So in some ways, it was a chance to do a lot of the growing up that I maybe missed out on because I was hiding and covering up. Um, and I will always be grateful for Todd, who was my first partner. And we had a very successful relationship that lasted many years. And we ultimately went our separate ways. But like I said, we crossed many rivers together. Um, but we were a success story about coming out in South Georgia.
And how long were you together?
We were together 12 years.
Wow. That's
So, yeah. So, and I'm very proud of my relationships. I guess that's one of the most um, important things in my life has been able to put a life together that includes both primary relationships and friendships that are based on authenticity,
mhm.
and based on and everybody in them being able to be who they are. So,
And then you moved to Asheville?
yeah, I moved to Asheville. My mother moved up here in the mid 90s, but I predated her in Asheville. Of course, a church trip brought me to Asheville in the beginning. Ski Bible Conference, we called it. But it was really a good excuse to learn how to ski over at the ice factory of Cataloochee. But we would stay at Ridgecrest and do Bible study at night and ski during the day. But it was a great way to get out of our little South Georgia town. And that was my first visit to Asheville and really been in love with it ever since. Um, I dated a woman from Brevard off and on for a number of years. So I always had connections to Asheville. And then my mother moved to Asheville from Atlanta in the mid 90s. So I was really a regular visitor to Asheville and tried my best to figure out how to get here and finally was able to do that full time in 2007. Just moved up here and figured it out, uh, and glad I did.
And then 2 years later,
2 years later, I met Mike, who is who I'm married to, who is my husband, um, and been living happily ever after. Love at first sight. That happens.
It does.
It does
And
happen.
as a on a personal side, um, the two of you complement each other very well. You know,
Well,
since
thank you.
I've known the two of you for so long. Um, and that were there any issues when you first got together or sort of navigating a new relationship?
Oh no, everything was just perfect.
Sunshine and
No,
rainbows.
yeah, no. You know, I knew Mike was. The minute I met Mike, it was like somebody had clapped both my ears. You know, you couldn't hear for a minute when I saw him. So it was like lightning had struck. And it really was that instant and has lasted since then and continues uh, to inspire me that way. Um, just the love of my life. And he calls forth the best in me and me and him. And we have a level of communication that I think is a real key to our success in a relationship, making sure that we understand what each of us means when we communicate. And I think that is a real key in relationships. Making sure not just that you have a shared vocabulary, but that you really understand that what the words mean to
Mhm.
each other, so that when you are using them and when you're talking, you really are on the same wavelength, and you can trust that and trust that you are both headed in the same direction. And we also work together here at the pharmacy, so it's very important to have those skills in place.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny hearing you say that because there are people in the world who see such a difference between a gay or lesbian, relationship for what the difference is in, a straight relationship or anything like that. They think they're so different. But listening to you and to other friends and things like that, there's absolutely no difference
No,
at all.
I
Because
agree
what
that.
you say about Mike is very similar to my marriage and to so many other marriages.
Mhm,
But I think people want there to be such a difference
mhm.
in how they are, and there's there's not. And I think that's lovely. And the fact that anybody but can be together, I mean, now it's 14 years you've been together, can then bring that
13,
to
yeah.
a work environment,
Mhm.
and still like each other.
Yes.
Um,
Some days we wonder why we brought it to work. And
but
then have these
that's
moments, and but that would be true of any couple,
oh, absolutely.
gay or straight or whatever, that work together.
Oh,
But
yes.
but yeah, I think when you can stop all the noise, you get down to the basics. Um, Relationships rely on some very key fundamentals, and for us, that kind of communication and making sure that communication is ongoing and not shut down is very key.
Absolutely.
I'm so much wiser. I'm not going to say I'm smarter, but I'm wiser than I was 20, 25 years ago when I started this journey. And I was really stupid 30 years ago and 40 years ago when I was just kind of doing what I thought was expected of me by the world. And, I'll meet a nice girl and get married and have a life. Well, could you be more vague? What do you want? And that's a key question for me. Like if I'm going to talk about my philosophy of life or whatever, I think it's a very key question is what do you want? And that's a question people need to really think about in their lives, in their professional life, in their personal life. What do you want? So, 40 years ago, I didn't have a clue. And then 30 years ago, maybe it was starting to emerge. The issues were starting to emerge. And then 20 years ago, I started to get on the right path. And now, um, starting to figure it out a little bit better and better. Like, what do you want? Okay, how do you get there? Um, what kind of people do you want to have in your life? How does this serve these purposes? How do we get from point A to point B?
Right. And we only have a couple minutes left, Jay, but I like that, what do you want?
Hmm.
I really do. And if someone were to come to you today, struggling to find themselves,
Hmm.
in whichever way they are feeling or thinking, is that what you would tell them?
Yeah, I think that's a key question. I would tell you what a dear friend named Sonny English told me one day. I was my mother had finally officially come out to me in the early '90s, and sat down next to my friend Sonny, and I said, "My mother's gay," and he took a drag on his cigarette, and he said, "Well, God made gay people too," and that was it. That was that was all he had to say. And he's like, "Next," you know. So it's like, okay, well, so what? What does that
Right,
change? What does that change? What does that have to do with you? You
right,
know. So, and that was a great lesson. And I hope that in my professional life, and part of what we do at Appalachian R Specialty Pharmacy is to we want people to feel comfortable. And in my broader life, I want people to. I'm not going to judge somebody for who or what they are any more than I would for their color or height or I mean what I mean. And I'm lucky I've been down that path, so I know not to, but I mean we are all in this together. Um, so we want people to have a home here, and what we can do in our professional capacity is um, make that better when they have to struggle with healthcare, when they're treating different diseases. A disease doesn't care if you're gay or straight. HIV doesn't care if you're gay or straight. A male, female, large or small, old or young. So, um, let's get down to what's really real. What do you want? You know, it's not that different a question here either.
Jay. We've known each other for a long
Years now.
time, years.
Yeah.
Um,
Going on 7 years, I think.
the fact that we've made it that long, um, I've always been proud to know you for so many different reasons. But having this conversation with you and the other night, has just brought a whole new level to it. And I am grateful for your friendship, your outlook, and bringing the outlook to those who are watching, um, this. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I am proud to be your friend.
Thank
And
you.
I know, and what Corey's not telling you is her father, who's no longer with us, he lived in South Georgia. So she knows about the heat and the humidity. Um, but she also knows about the people and what life in South Georgia is like. But I am very proud to call Corey and her husband among close friends of me and Mike's. And I know
Thank
that anybody that encounters Corey in a professional capacity um, has a fierce advocate on their side. And I am happy to know you. Happy that we're on the same side of so many things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay. Before we leave, just to let you know, everybody who's watching, um, if yes, thank you for the banner. If you enjoyed this episode of Rainbow Inspirations, um, please watch again and share. We have some amazing people on. Pride Time is February 9th, a wonderful social hour, as is the Coffee and Equality on February 23rd. And if you go on the Blue Ridge Pride website, you can find us on there and our projects, our plans, and we welcome any feedback, anybody who is interested in joining or anything like that. So again, Jay, thank you profusely. And um, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay warm.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.